Hello everyone and welcome to today's talk. Now in just a second I'm going to be introducing our speaker, but I have a couple of housekeeping things just to tell you about first. Can I first check that AI Media can hear and are captioning this event? Excellent, thank you very much. So that will also remind you, closed captioning has been enabled. You should see that at the bottom of the screen if you click on the CC button at the bottom. So this is a Zoom webinar. Some of you may have been on a Zoom webinar before. Others you may not be familiar. So you won't be seen or heard directly in the webinar. We'll be listening to the talk. But there's a button at the bottom of the screen. It says, here we go. The button at the bottom of the screen says Q&A. If you click on the Q&A, then you can write in a question, and these can be submitted anonymously. Please do note, however, that we may not be able to answer all the questions that you ask. We hope to get through as many of them as we can. But if you click on that Q&A and type in your questions, the webinar's live captioned and also recorded. So this webinar will be available on YouTube for anyone who misses the event. But note also that the Q&A section will not be part of the final recording. So on then to today. I'm absolutely delighted to invite Nicole Brown to come and talk to us today. So Dr. Nicole Brown is Director of the Social Research and Practice and Education Limited and Associate Professor in Education at the UCL Institute of Education in London. Her research interests lie with advancing learning and teaching and ways of improving knowledge generation. So she says that the underlying principle for her work is that research, teaching, and social activism are inextricably interconnected. And as a consequence, her personal practices in research, teaching, and dissemination are also interwoven. And a constant in the narrative of her work is to give voice to the unheard and empower the marginalized. She has two recent volumes, both published in the last couple of years. One, Ableism in Academia, Theorizing Experiences of Disabilities and Chronic Illnesses in Higher Education, and another, Lived Experiences of Ableism in Academia. So we're really excited to hear, we're delighted she's here with us today, and we're really excited to hear what she's going to tell us about these topics. Thank you. So over to you, Nicole.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting me, for having me. Also, thank you very much for this really kind introduction to my work. It's really humbling to hear somebody talk to you about your work in that way. So thank you very much. Welcome to everybody who's joining us today. I really appreciate that you are here. I do hope that you are writing as many questions as possible in the Q&A function, but also do use the Q&A function to add comments. Sometimes, you know, you may not necessarily have a question, but you would like to share a comment where something may resonate or not. Today, I'm going to be talking about ableism in academia, but specifically about hearing and deafness. And that's why I called this topic "They Hear but They Don't Listen," and that's coming out of something that I've always felt is that people hear when I say, you know, I've got these needs or I've got these things that we need to change in terms of adjustments, but they don't necessarily listen. And today I'm going to be talking for the first time ever about my own experiences and drawing on those with deafness and hearing loss. I'm going to be using sort of two kinds of slides, as you will see. There is some with that kind of border around them, and those are actually extracts from journal entries, reflection and very personal kind of journalings that I have done in my own time. And then the ones without that kind of border, that are kind of the theorization and the theories and the strategies around them, if you would like. So today is all about deafness and hearing loss. I should start first of all with a little bit of information about deafness and hearing loss. It may not feel like an important topic, and that's why we do need to talk about it, because actually it affects about 5% of the world population. And at the moment, there is this prediction that by 2050, 1 person in 10 will experience disabling hearing loss. Now, the reason why I'm saying that is so important is because actually what we tend to do is we tend to put that aside because we're not directly affected by it now. And it's often seen as something that's a disability of the aged and of the old people, and it doesn't really hit us. So it doesn't affect us, and therefore we don't really talk about it. To put it into perspective as to what it means to have disabling hearing loss, disabling hearing loss is around 40 decibels. So it's something like the sound in a library, or the bird calls in your garden, or breathing, whispers, rustling leaves. All of those are around the noise level of 40 decibels. So imagine not hearing any of these things. That's what it means to have disabling hearing loss. Currently, we know that the most affected people with hearing loss and deafness are those people that are coming from low and middle income countries and that are aged 65 and plus, specifically within the areas or from the areas of South Asia, Asia and Pacific, and the sub-Saharan Africa. So you can see how it's easy to kind of push that aside and actually think, well, it doesn't affect us. It's not for us to think about, and we can therefore put our heads into the sand. Reality is, though, that the deafness and hearing loss has got significant impact on people. So anyone who's affected by deafness and hearing loss early on, we do know that these people are not quite as successful as their hearing counterparts. And that then translates into employment rates as well. So within employment, we have about 65% of deaf or people being in employment, and there are 79% that are of the hearing population. So we can see that unemployment rates are a lot higher amongst those that are deaf and have a hearing loss. What I would like to share with you now is a journal entry to kind of put that into, kind of explain to you what it feels like. January 2019. I sit in the turquoise green sound booth. I don't know if this one has holy walls or doesn't. The booths are all different but the same, no matter where you're having the hearing tests done. Having been hard of hearing from birth, I have so many hearing tests throughout my life. I could actually be an audiologist myself by now. We start with the easy one, headphones on, and you listen out for the beeps. If you hear a beep, you click the button. Over the years, I've become quite adept at making this a reaction game. How quickly can I press the buzzer this time? Right ear done. After a while, my concentration span starts to drop and I'm starting to hear beeps where I'm not even sure if they are in my head or in my ears. Again, I'm used to that. I'm really quite smug about this whole episode. Left ear done. Next, it's the bone conduction test. That one is always tricky for me. The audiologist puts the special headset over my head, places the oscillator on the bone behind my ear, and off we go. I can tell that I'm not doing well, but that's okay. Some fluctuations always happen. You just need a lapse of concentration, perhaps a little bit more tired than usual or have a cold. Even if you're not showing any signs of sneezing or sniffles, your hearing may already be affected. Also, the oscillator wasn't positioned very well. The audiologist opens the door to the booth and explains that we finished our test on the right ear. I'm surprised. I tell her I don't think that this was the best test and that the oscillator wasn't placed very well. It was placed just fine. I'd like to repeat that test. We do the left ear now. Beep, buzz, beep, buzz. The booth door opens and I'm done. But I'm not. I'm still confused. I haven't had the bone conduction for my right ear. Maybe the oscillator wasn't positioned very well. In fact, I know it wasn't because I couldn't feel the pressure I usually feel. And also, if I don't press the button for a specific frequency, then the audiologist just needs to increase the volume. Some back and forth between the audiologist and me follows. In the end, I get the audiologist to repeat the bone conduction for my right ear. Headset on, oscillator on that bone, booth door closed, we're off again. I wait for the beeps. There are none. At one point, I can feel vibration on the bone behind my ear, but I cannot hear the sound. I know that I should be able to hear that beep. The vibration is there, but the sound is not. The sound just is not there. No matter how much I concentrate, the sound is not there. It is at that point that I realize I'm deaf. I'm in shock. As the audiologist opens the door to the booth, I break down in tears. Now, that hearing test that I have just recounted for you identified that I had severe, profound hearing loss between 70 and 90 decibels. Remember, I said earlier that disabling hearing loss starts at 40 decibels. We're now talking between 70 and 90 decibels. That noise level is the noise of a vacuum cleaner. It's the noise of a food blender. It's the noise of a Boeing 737 at a nautical mile before landing. It's hugely noisy. And that's the part that I couldn't hear. And this is the part where I started to kind of think about, for me, hearing loss or being hard of hearing was one thing in my life, but being deaf was quite another. So what does it mean to be deaf in academia? Well, there's the first thing that's going back to the kind of the definition of deafness. And I'm using deafness here as an example for all kinds of chronic illnesses, neurodivergences, and disabilities. The deafness is just one exemplification of that same problem. There is a certain element that we have inside ourselves where we think what it means to be deaf. And this is what we describe as internalized ableism. So a lot of the time, I always thought of myself as being hard of hearing or having hearing loss, but being deaf, that was not me, that was somebody else. And I could not identify with that term of deafness. Now, obviously, we do know that within the deaf culture, there are two different kinds of deafness. There's the one with the non-capital D, and there's one with capital D, with people with capital D identifying the deafness as part of who they are. And again, for the decision to be able to say, I am deaf, capital D, there is a lot of identity work that needs to go on first. And that is one of the issues that we are encountering in academia, is that kind of level of personal definition that often kind of cuts against the public disclosure or the kind of the public discourses that are happening. The other thing is obviously being deaf or hard of hearing is that you're worried about facing ageism. It's no longer just, that you've got, a problem that you can kind of hide away in a way. This is about being decidedly old, whether you like it or not. Actually, in my case, I don't consider myself old. I have just turned 45 for the sake of completeness here. But what I'm trying to say is that actually, because we know that deafness and hearing loss is associated with older age, 65 plus, if you go back to the beginning of my talk, it means that, suddenly you're lumped into a category that you don't really feel comfortable belonging in. And the final thing is that, once you kind of start thinking about the deafness, you're obviously being, there's the fear of being stereotyped, of being stigmatized, obviously as somebody who's old, but also as somebody who's got some kind of problems. Now, in Goffman's terms, so Goffman's a sociologist who was talking about stigma, and in his work, he was talking about how there are particular kinds of symbols that are, expressing, an identity in a way that they're becoming, that the people become stigmatized. Now, for example, for a wheelchair user, it would potentially be that wheelchair that kind of identifies that person as somebody needing a wheelchair. And then people in the general public would stigmatize that person because of that wheelchair. Hearing aids function in very much the same way, in that people can see them, they are there and they are visible, and they become a stigma symbol in that way that, you've obviously got kind of that issue of of sharing your deafness all the time, whether you want to or not. Now, as somebody with relative long hair, you probably don't see them as much, but obviously it's not just about me here, it's about the wider population. And some people may not accept hearing aids because they are that symbol of stigma. Now, really, this brings us to the kind of idea of you know, how disclosure means, how disclosure functions. And what it is really, in a way, a weighing of the public and the private and personal costs. For a lot of people, identifying in a particular way, whether that's deafness with hearing loss or other chronic conditions or neurodiversity or disabilities, there is obviously that kind of that stigma that we've just been talking about. But there's also this personal coming to terms. I am ill, I need help. In my case, being deaf. On the other hand, you also, you know, there's this fear of being pigeonholed. You don't necessarily want to be the difficult person, the person that's always asking everyone to use the microphone, the person with whatever disability it is, with the hearing loss in that case. Because what you want to be known for is you want to be known for your own scholarship, your research work, or the activist work that you do, or you want to be known as the person that's an outstanding teacher. And therefore being pigeonholed into this kind of cupboard of the disabled person, the difficult person, the person that's always asking for something, is counteractive to that narrative. Obviously, also people are worried about being treated differently or badly. And then there are repercussions in practical senses. You know, once you kind of admit that there is an issue with whatever it is, and you need some kind of help, it may actually impede with your everyday role and academic progression. One of the things that I've often found is, as people found out that I'm quite sort of vocal about disability and about equality and diversion, suddenly, diversity and inclusion, suddenly I've been asked to be on all sorts of different committees and panels. And again, there's a lot of extra work that's required of that person to kind of attend all of these panels and committees, and suddenly you're no longer known for the actual research work that you may be doing. In addition, you're actually not just managing your own illness, condition, or disability, you're also managing colleagues' responses. So, for example, somebody, you know, like being offered a special equipment, as I have been in some meetings to kind of help me with hearing, suddenly people are like, whoa, but why do you get preferential treatment? They don't necessarily see it as preferential to be deaf, but they do see it as preferential treatment that you get offered something that they didn't get offered. So in that respect, the adjustments are really, really, you know, important, and they are the kind of, in a way, the benefits of disclosure. So if you are disclosing your condition, you're obviously asking for some kind of adjustments to happen, and if they do happen, then that's a benefit of disclosing. But at the same time, these adjustments actually could be leading again to being singled out, to being treated differently. There's peer pressure, there's jealousy, that we've had all of those things. And then there's obviously the extra effort that's required to kind of ask and organize adjustments in the first place. Now, in my case, one of the things that I've always kind of had is, you know, the question, well, will there be any repercussions if I'm talking about my deafness? And that's why there is this kind of, in the bigger scheme of things, there's almost like a lack of transparency of what happens if, so that sometimes you just don't feel like you can actually say, look, I am deaf, or I am hard of hearing, I have got hearing loss. So what is the status of disability disclosure more generally in academia? Well, it's not a good picture if we're honest about it. So this is the statistics from a few years ago. I know that the latest one has come out. Unfortunately, I have not been able to access the latest disclosure figures yet. I hope to do that over the next few weeks. I do know that the picture has improved somewhat, but actually the overarching trends are pretty much the same. So what we had in 2017-18 was we had quite a significant amount of undergraduate students disclosing some kind of disability. That's 14.4%, but that compared to 9.3% of taught postgraduate students. And that went down to 9.0% when we started looking at postgraduate research students. And if we then looked further, where we're looking at academic staff, professional services staff within academia, suddenly the disclosure rates drop off even further. What's interesting also to note is that there is a difference between academic staff that are on teaching only or on research only contracts, and professional services and support staff are in a different category as well. So as you can see from the slide there, 5.3% of teaching only academics were disclosing a disability or some kind of chronic illness or neurodivergence, but only 3.2% of research only academics. There's quite a big difference. If we're looking at professional services and support staff, is 6.1. So what's happening here? Well, what's happening here is that we can see that a particular kind of transition points and particularities of posts, we have a different kind of picture around disabilities. So what we know is there are three different trends at play. First of all, there are fewer disabled people in academia in the first place. Many disabled people drop out at different stages, which is why we have this kind of experience of the different at the different transition points. But then the final part is those that do continue are less likely to disclose. So we've got this kind of experience there that actually there is something going on here in academia that makes it really, really difficult for individuals to kind of highlight what it means to be having some kind of difficulty. So I'm going to kind of talk to you a little bit now, again, from my journal, of what it feels like to be deaf. July 2019, freshly out of the shower. I try to brush my hair, the tangles of my natural curls requiring more attention than I would like. I cannot put my hearing aids in, so I start brushing without. But as I do, I realize how much I usually rely on hearing the brush pull its teeth through my tangled curls. Not hearing, I lose my ability to brush my hair. Most literature and people talk about senses compensating for the loss of one. But not hearing does not suddenly equip me with X-ray vision or at least 20/20 vision. I don't gain the superpower of smell or taste. The only sense that's heightening is the sense of danger. With the narrowing of my auditory field, my heartbeat quickens, my body tenses, my muscles tighten, I become nervous and agitated. My body is in fight or flight mode, triggering anxiety and panic. And all that in the safety of my bedroom, trying to brush my hair without my hearing aids in. Sorry. One of the things that I would like to kind of point out at this stage is what can we actually do with people, for people like myself? Actually, it's really simple. There are so many simple things that we can do to kind of improve communication with individuals who are hard of hearing or deaf. So the first rule is really to have clear view of your face. That's one of the things that's often overlooked in a crowded room. You may not want to be kind of seen, standing up on a podium, but actually that view from the podium will often help the people in the room to actually see your face. That is because sometimes, even if you haven't learned to lip read, you do take cues and clues from the body language, from the face, from the lips, and that helps understanding. The other thing is also to kind of have good microphone etiquette and to model good microphone etiquette. So one of the things that's really a bugbear of mine is that when you go into a conference, a lot of the times people are saying, oh, you don't need me to use the microphone, do you? There's only 20 of us in the room. Well, in that situation, it's really hard for somebody to kind of say, actually, I do need you to use the microphone. You're in a room full of strangers. You don't feel like saying that. So it would be best if all of us were just automatically walking up to the room, taking the microphone, clipping it on and using it. And once somebody asks a question in the room, to actually repeat the question before you give the answer, because other people may not have heard that question. That's what good microphone etiquette is all about, and actually doesn't cost anything either. The other thing is things like, having someone's attention before you speaking. There is no point. I mean, this is the one thing that's really, really difficult for me, is when people talk to me from behind. Sometimes I can make out that somebody's speaking to me, but I can't necessarily make out the exact words. It depends on the time of day. That tends to be something that's more difficult for me in the evening, probably because I'm more tired by then. So yes, getting my attention first and letting me sort of turn around so I can see your face, that's much better for me. Giving time, that's really important. It's literally just kind of offering people time to think. Sometimes you kind of make sense of what you've just heard, and it just takes a little longer, and therefore being given time, that's really helpful. The final thing that I'd like to say about the kind of basic rules of communication is the one thing is speaking up. A lot of the time when I say, could you repeat that please, or could you speak louder please, often people don't actually get louder. They may slow down their speech, which is also helpful in many ways, but actually what helps me most is people speaking up. And if I'm asking you to speak up, then I would like to kindly ask, can you speak up please? So there's that kind of element. Now, I'd like to finish this kind of talk on a more positive note with the March 2020 entry. Sitting on the sofa in the living room, Bluetoothing Van Morrison's These Are the Days, from his 1989 Avalon Sunset album, into my bionic ears. I listened intently to the guitar opening, waiting for the drums to come in, feeling emotional. I've heard this song many times before, but this is the first time I listened with my bionic ears. This is the first time that I don't just simply hear the main melody of the guitar, but the accompanying chords. It's the first time that I hear the flam on the drums. I'm amazed. I've always liked this song, but there are notes here that I've not ever heard before. These are the days. Van Morrison's voice rings in my ears. I can actually make out the individual words and understand them. This clarity of speech, this beauty of sound. I've had my bionic ears for a few months now, and I've been listening to more music and podcasts, and I've been watching more films than ever before. I realize I have a lifetime of music, podcasts, and films to catch up. So what I'd like to kind of highlight here is that what I've talked to you about today is coming out of the Lived Experiences of Ableism in Academia book. It's one of the chapters in that book. I'm also pointing out the other book that was mentioned at the beginning. The one on the left, Ableism in Academia, is free to download from UCL Press. Lived Experiences, unfortunately, is not free, but can be purchased. And with that, I'd really like to kind of stop at this stage, and I'm hoping that we can be able to have a conversation about what I've been saying, but also about some of the other things that people may be interested in regarding ableism in academia. For the sake of completeness, please find my contact details on here as well, and join me on Twitter at Ableism Academia. I'm going to stop here. I'm just going to stop sharing my screen as well. And I look forward to the conversation that's going to follow.
Thank you so much, Nicole. I really enjoyed that talk. There was so much in there that I think many of us who are listening will sort of sympathize and understand with, all of the things about weighing up, carefully weighing up the costs or benefits of disclosure, and then ending up on lots of committees and I'm sure many people have conditions which aren't fully understood by other people who might be trying to be helpful, don't realize how they can be helpful, and all of everything you are saying, whether specifically about deafness and hearing loss or more generally, I'm sure resonates with many people. And I know we've got someone who said unfortunately had to go, but they've really enjoyed. Thank you for the webinar. They'd really enjoyed it and looking forward to seeing it on YouTube.
Thank you.